Geek. Talking baseball every week. Because they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek. The worst game of the season episode? Question mark?
Never say that. It can always get worse.
It's true. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily. That with me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic. That game started so promising.
It is fun. Do you think,
Thursday.
in general, at the end of every season, like when it's still sort of fresh and everyone, like let's say November 1st or October 1st, excuse me, of every season, if you would poll 50,000 Twins fans, would the vast majority name the same game as quote unquote the worst game of the season in a given season?
I don't think you would get a majority to line up on one game.
Right.
But I bet you would. I bet
Couple games.
I bet most of people would line up around 3 games.
Yeah.
2 or 3 games. People remember like 2 or 3 games. Now this one I don't think is going to be well remembered, and probably would not do particularly well in that voting because it was an afternoon game, which a lot of people couldn't watch.
Right, and also if Pagán blows 3 more, it's just all kind of tell me the worst Cleveland loss last year.
Yeah, exactly,
you can't
right,
because they were all in a row.
It was right.
Except I could tell you
all of September.
I could tell you in 2021 the worst loss was the Oakland 13-12 game.
Okay.
That Arise threw the ball away in the whatever inning,
right? And
they blew 900 leads in Colomé. I feel like some seasons,
2019, it was the one that they lost first place versus
Cleveland.
I would say 2020, I can remember. That was the one where they lost to the White Sox the day after the trade deadline.
Right.
And and the 13-12 game, that was definitely...
That was 2021, had to be.
That might have been 2020.
No, couldn't be. Because it was
they couldn't play
season.
they couldn't play Oakland, right?
But it was also COVID related because
right.
players were out for that trip.
You're right.
Yeah, it's funny. That would be I was going to say a fun exercise, but not fun. It's not the right word.
Like a big lead versus Giolito in 2020, and then 2019 was definitely the one where Taylor Rogers blew it on a Sunday afternoon because we ended up doing the show right afterwards. They lost first place.
Yeah.
After the big comeback, that was like
we may have delved too deep into this. My point was that it was a bad loss to the Dodgers. A couple bad losses to the Dodgers, really.
Well,
although so they're now done with the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Astros. Now those are no longer like the consensus 3 best teams because the Rays have been phenomenal and the Braves have been phenomenal and on and on. But I would say over the last decade, those are the 3 most powerful teams, certainly. Yes. And if you're going to test yourself against 3 teams, not...
Certainly coming into the season, you took a look at those teams and said, here's where these are statement
And
series
even now, Houston and New York haven't gotten off to the best starts, but they have better records than the Twins and all that. The Dodgers are way out in first place, and they're on I think they've won 10 out of 11 or something. And the Twins now finish the season... First of all, it's nice to just be done with them.
Right.
Although,
but they still have Houston.
They have one more series
Yes,
against
they have one more series versus Houston.
You're right. Never mind.
Yep.
But they're 7-6 against those 3 teams. And you think, okay, that's fine. Every other year against those 3, including last year, by the way, they're 2-10 or something like that, with an absurd run differential where they get outscored by 800 runs.
I sat in on Brandon Molesky's show, filling in for the Common Man yesterday, and his initial question was, "What do we take away from the Dodgers series? From some tough losses?" And my answer is, I think we take away the same thing we took away from the Yankees and the Astros. This isn't a dominating team. The Twins aren't a dominating team, but they belong. Right, they belong as one of the better teams now. The rest of the year doesn't really necessarily establish that, but they at the very least they don't seem to just fold into the fetal position versus some of these, more legendary teams.
Now that is a stance taken by a team that loses. You won't hear Dodgers fans going, "Well, they hung with them."
Right.
It's
But I mean, you can't get rid of your history versus those
No,
teams,
but I don't
right?
mean losing in the past. I mean, they lost 2 out of 3 of the Dodgers. They lost the last 2. But just in general, the idea that they didn't get smoked by 3 very good, powerful teams, is a good thing. Those are, I'm guessing, 3 of the top 6 or 7 payroll teams too. Yeah. And I would certainly bet on all 3 of those teams being in the playoffs. So it's at least, I like to use this, but proof of concept that this is a team that can compete. Now the flip side to that is, you should have won game 1.
Right. You should have really won game, but as of inning number 2, you should have won game 3.
Yes, you should have won both those games.
Right, yeah.
You should have won game 1. Now you can blame the umpiring, especially in Alex Kirilloff's at bat.
Oh my God!
And I won't say you're wrong on that. It was you rarely, once in a while, you will see an umpire consistently make bad calls, like on down and away pitches.
Right. That's right.
But to have two pitches within the span of the same at bat, within 3 pitches,
right?
There's only one in between. One up and out of the strike zone on the left side, and one up and out of the strike zone on the right side, and both get called strikes. And you rarely see that,
right? Well, you also rarely see the Twins announcers criticize an umpire, and they were all over that one. It's even more rare that you see the opposing team's announcer baffled by the umpire, where they're just like, boy, did we get a gift there. What the hell was that?
But within that, they still could have and should have won that game.
Yep.
That only affected the Alex Kirilloff at bat. There were some other iffy strike calls in that game, and obviously the double that was actually a foul ball hurt them, and on and on and on. But they still had a chance to win that game and didn't. And then game 3, they absolutely should have won that game. I think.
Yep.
Or at least not lost it in such soul-crushing fashion.
So predictable a fashion? Is that what was particularly soul-crushing about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Everyone wants to talk
We've been waiting for that loss since December.
Right. And we can talk. I mean, we can start with it. We can talk about Pagán more, but I know everyone who's, I don't want to say defending Pagán, but at least not burying Pagán, as I want to do, says, well, he was pitching so well for, the past 3 weeks or whatever. But if you gave him all a lie detector the moment he took the mound with 2 men on, up a run in this, bottom of the 7th, I guarantee there weren't a lot of happy hearts there saying, ooh, good, Emilio Pagán.
I mean, it's a fair point that he, in fact, has been better this year than last year. That is just such...
It's a real low bar.
Right.
And even he's performed well over the last X number of weeks. Since April 20th, he gave up 6 runs against the Red Sox. And I'm the first one to say, we talked about this at the time, like I'm very far from an Emilio Pagán stan or defender or whatever.
Right.
But that was a really difficult spot to be put in, to have to rush into a game in the 3rd inning because Maeda got hurt and just have to soak up whatever happened at that point.
Yes.
But he still gave up 6 runs. And then, in the, 3 weeks since then, I think he had roughly 15 innings or something like that. That was pretty good. But none of those almost maybe 1 or 2 of those 15 innings came in anything resembling a game that mattered, like a spot that mattered, even medium leverage or something like that. Now, that's common. You work a guy in low leverage and he works his way up. But
every time you do that with Emilio Pagán, you regret it.
That's sort of the thing we get to. And now he's at the we've talked about him so much, and I've written about him so much, and going back to last year, obviously, that now anytime he does anything bad, it's just my Twitter becomes that for hours and hours and hours. And I don't know. I don't want to
We had a discussion before the season began about I was hoping that he wouldn't make the opening day roster based on his spring training performance. Which I knew was absurd, but there it was.
Yeah, I mean it's we also talked a lot during the offseason of why haven't they added one more, or added one, they really added none, right-handed bullpen piece. And I thought Michael Fulmer would be an easy guy to re-sign for $3 or $4 million, which is what he ended up getting from the Cubs. But they apparently weren't interested in Michael Fulmer. Now, I should note, Michael Fulmer's been terrible for the Cubs, so that wouldn't have helped at all.
My understanding after that was signed was that what Fulmer wanted was a chance to be in the starting
rotation. People keep saying that, but I saw no mention of that, and he never started a game in spring training, and he's been a setup man for the Cubs. So maybe he told the Twins that at some point. But either way, whether it's Fulmer or someone else.
The truth, the point here is there's 20 other guys too. That you could say,
now, some of them are probably off to terrible starts too. So it was not like an automatic fix just to add some $4 million veteran reliever. I mean, we saw that the year before with Joe Smith or whatever. But
we actually have a story about that coming out Tuesday. A review of all the free agent relievers that were signed this offseason. Turns out a lot of them turned out pretty well, which is something we don't often see.
Turned out we're a month into the season. We'll see. Joe Smith looks pretty good a month into the season too.
True,
For that matter, Emilio Pagán looked pretty decent a month into last season. But the idea was, really they checked pretty much every box and overchecked the rotation box compared to kind of what we mapped out as here's the things they have to do this offseason. And the two they didn't check were a right-handed setup quality reliever, not someone at the maybe Jorge Lopez level, but someone at the Griffin Jax level. Not Griffin Jax currently because he's also struggling. But that wasn't filled, and I think that has been a clear weakness now, especially that they've lost Thielbar from the left side, and they're having to elevate guys like Brock Stewart and Emilio Pagán, and they were counting on Alcala and Pagán, which neither of them look ready for that job. And then the other box they didn't check all offseason was a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. We talked about McCutchen or Trey Mancini or Mitch Haniger or Adam Duvall, guys like that. And I don't think that's been like a debilitating weakness or anything, but it's clearly been a weakness to the point that we're going to talk about Nick Gordon in a second. Nick Gordon's on.
They're going to call up. They're only right-handed.
They're calling up Kyle Garlick from AAA, even though he really hasn't hit much at AAA, just because they know he can fill that specific platoon, part-time role because they didn't fill it, and I think that's hurt them. You look at their numbers against left-handed pitchers, and it's been terrible, in part because they've always started at least one or sometimes two, Gallo, Kepler, Larnach in the outfield against lefties because they don't have that job filled.
I've been meaning to look up what their OPS is versus left-handed pitchers this year.
It's horrendous.
Is it bad?
They're hitting like 160, something roughly, or 180.
Again, one of the bottom five or something. All that work that they put in the offseason ended up being good.
I don't know where it ranks, but it's bad. And so the Pagán thing obviously relates to the first part of that, which is not whether it was re-signing Fulmer, which would have worked out poorly probably anyway, or just a run-of-the-mill 30-something-year-old $4 to $5 million reliever. Instead, they brought back Pagán. I mean, it's worth noting always that they had a clean break opportunity with Pagán.
Yes.
This didn't have to be a nasty breakup. It was just a let's go our separate ways.
Let's just not offer arbitration.
Right. Or they could have traded him, which I had multiple Twins officials all winter on several occasions insist to me, we could trade Emilio if we wanted to. And I even, at one point, I was maybe feeling a little too comfortable, and I said, why don't you?
Why wouldn't you?
And they were like, what? And instead of cutting him, which they could have done with no monetary cost, or trading him, which they claim they could have done, which would have been even better, you save the money that you would have given them, and you bring back some semblance of value, a bucket of baseballs, a low single-A reliever, whatever it may be. They brought him back for $3.5 million, and it's not the $3.5 million, although certainly they could have used that, but it's more the opportunity cost of, he's going to be one of the lower leverage guys in our bullpen. But as we talk about now for 5 years,
right? Even low leverage guys have to find a time, right?
In modern usage of pitchers. And by the way, the Twins are still leading the major leagues in innings per start, so their starters are going as deep as any team in baseball right now. But that's still roughly 5.5 to 6.5 innings per start.
Right.
Which means you're using 3 or 4 relievers in any close game. Yeah. And when you do that, the idea that, don't worry about Pagán, he's only our number 5 or number 6 reliever. Well, as we see, if you play 3 close games in a row and you use your main 3 or 4 pitchers, which in the Twins' case is Duran, Lopez, Jax, and it had been Thielbar. Right. Now it's, who knows. By the time you get to like that second or third game, some of those guys are unavailable. Or in the case of the third game in LA, they were saving Lopez specifically for the 8th and Duran for the 9th. Correct. But Jax had pitched, 4 times in the last 6 games and was struggling himself. So your 6th guy suddenly is in a 1-run game at Dodger Stadium in the 7th inning with 2 guys on base. And is that the highest leverage situation? No, it's still only the 7th inning. But that was certainly a game changing situation one way or the other. And that's, I think, the flaw in the Emilio Pagán, he's just another guy in the bullpen and we'll use him in low leverage, which is, those guys still need to pitch medium and high leverage sporadically and sometimes semi-regularly, depending on how the other bullpen goes, especially now that Jax is struggling and Thielbar's out. Right. Somebody, Brock Stewart maybe, is being elevated, and then everyone else moves up a spot. Correct. But then the other problem is it doesn't matter now with Pagán specifically how he pitches in these low leverage spots, because there is no reason whatsoever to have any faith that any amount of good work for weeks in low leverage will lead to justified faith in high leverage. Well, and that's the problem too.
And I'll give you a C. That if you're going to invest those innings into an arm, invest those innings in an arm that will be of some use to you in years 2, 3, and 4.
Well, that's fair too.
Right? I mean, it's not just that Pagán has been bad, right? And I understand that, listen, we often talk about swapping guys in and out of these 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th spots of the bullpen, right? That's perfectly reasonable thing to do, right? But, if you're going to give those, the way to use those spots is to end up using them as a way to develop somebody who can be one of your 1, 2, 3, 4 guys.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with Griffin Jax last year. They started him off in kind of long relief. Right. He then went to sort of middle relief and then was a setup man by the end of the year.
We saw it for Brock Stewart
this
year, right? He's gone from, probably the 7th guy in the bullpen or 6th guy in the bullpen to number 3 guy in the bullpen right now.
They, I'm sure, would say, and have said, sort of, with Pagán that, your point of future years is not an issue with Pagán because he'll be a free agent after this year.
Yeah, right.
But
that is my point, though.
But Brock Stewart isn't necessarily a future investment. He's a 31-year-old journeyman. Yeah. I mean, maybe. But I think their point with Pagán along those lines was within a year they viewed him the same way, which is we'll start him out in low leverage, and by the end of the year he'll be a setup man. Because if that wasn't, first of all, I think that's a misguided.
Year,
Yeah, by August.
By August, he'll be something special. Right.
Yeah. I think that's a flawed view of Emilio Pagán, but we've been over that 1,000 times. And B, I guess to find that out. The only way to find that out,
is to trust him with the same.
At least occasional.
Trust Lucy to hold the ball still this time.
Thank you. It's a better way. Right? I was trying to think of analogies in my head, and for some reason,
this might be the time that she doesn't pull the ball away. But what evidence is there?
The thing that I keep coming back to with Pagán, and these are a lot of the same talking points that we talked about in June and July of last year and all offseason, and I apologize if it seems repetitive, but it is repetitive.
That is the point.
Right. I did not think we would be in this same situation talking about the same player in the same ways. And what I keep coming back to is why go through this trouble for Emilio Pagán? Right. That's what I don't get. And if you have relievers struggle, I mean, relievers they burn bright and they fade away quickly.
Sure. And because they are all a small sample size.
Right. And I've seen people go, well, how come you're not as harsh on Griffin Jax right now, who's blown a bunch of games?
Right, yes.
But the underlying metrics of Griffin Jax are much better. I also believe until the last couple outings, he had just gotten unlucky.
Right.
There's no bad luck with Emilio Pagán giving up grand slams. Right. I mean, when home runs are your issue.
When he walks 2 players,
now,
including
the strike zone
run,
jumped around on him.
Right.
So, okay, that's fair. But yeah, when your issue is giving up 450-foot home runs, no one goes, boy, he really got some bad luck there.
Right.
Whereas with Jax, whether you want to buy into that or not, there's been a lot of squibbers, there's been a lot of bloops, and then it kind of snowballs. Right. Which that part's on him.
Right.
But that's why people look at Griffin Jax and go, well, he's blown 3 games, but we're going to keep working with him. The thing with Pagán that I don't get is now this is the 4th season in a row, which spans 3 teams, by the way.
Yes.
The 4th season in a row that he's had a ERA worse than the league average, much worse than the league average, but worse than league average, and a negative win probability.
Right.
Which means he's prevented runs at a much worse rate than a relief pitcher league-wide average.
Right.
And those runs have hurt the team more than an average amount because, as we see, when you put him in a high-leverage situation, it's flammable, basically. Right. And he's the only relief pitcher in baseball that's true every year since 2020. 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. It's 4 straight seasons. And 5 of 6 seasons. He was good 5 years ago, but then the year before that, same story. And I look at him, and what they always say with him is, we believe he has good stuff. We believe he throws hard. We believe he misses bats. We believe in all these other metrics and, eye test too. Right. But I question if that's even true at this point because he doesn't throw 100. He throws 96. And 10 years ago, people would have been having cartoon googly eyes for 96. Yeah, now it's like, okay, 96. Everyone in the bullpen who's anything throws 96. And
we've got plenty of starters.
Right. Well, right. And he misses, bats. He strikes out 10 or 11 guys per 9 innings. It's like, the league average is like 9.5 per 9 innings for a reliever. And what we kind of concluded last year, and this seems to be the case again this year, unfortunately, is all the good stuff and missed bats and velocity and spin rate and whatever you want to focus on. And he's working on a cutter this year that he feels confident in. There's always stuff that you can point to. That's all true, except if every 20th pitch you throw is on a tee and it gets hit 450 feet, all that other stuff doesn't matter. When you miss like he misses, it doesn't matter what all the other stuff is. It's like a quarterback who has a good completion percentage and can hit every route and can scramble well and gets rid of the football,
but
except
keeps throwing it into the flat to the opposing team.
Once a game, he just throws a pick six that gets returned for a touchdown every game.
Right.
We go, well, he completed 80% of his passes and he averaged 9 yards a throw, and it goes, well, yeah, but 14 times in 14 games. He threw it right to the linebacker and he ran it back for a pick six. It's like it cancels out everything else to the point that it becomes almost like am I taking crazy pills here that we're still in this situation?
Listen, you hear it from old time baseball people and from new time baseball. The 2 things you can't do as a reliever are walk people and give up home runs.
Right, and those are the 2 things he tends to do in high leverage spot. The bigger the spot, the more often he does that, and. Obviously the Dodgers one was an example, which is walk in the tying run, give up a grand slam. And it's like, well, okay. And I looked at from a WPA win probability standpoint, because that measures the impact on the actual wins and losses. He decreased their win probability by 60-something%. And I thought, wow, that's a lot. And I looked, and that's the 4th time since the beginning of last season that he's knocked at least 50% off the Twins' win probability. Yeah. The entire rest of the team has done it 6 times. No one else has done it more than twice. Tyler Duffy did it twice and got his ass cut in the middle of last season.
Right.
It's just such an absurd level of this to have it happen 3-4 times. And obviously there were other games where they lost 30% of their win probability with it.
I mean, just so we're clear, what that means is when you begin a game,
you're at 50%.
You're at 50%, roughly. Right? Yeah. Right. So that is more than a loss.
Yes.
essentially 4 times.
Yeah. I mean, think of it this way.
It's turning. You would have been better off just with 50 at the very first pitch of the game than you would be with that
instead of having a lead So. I don't know. I had a few other stats, but people probably got the message at this point.
Let's get back to him in a second. Look at our sponsors here real quick. We got to talk a little bit about it's spring. You are looking at your lawn, and you're, if you are wise and look in the future, you're like, this lawn in 2 months, what's it going to look like? Am I going to be embarrassed?
Yeah, don't be the one bad lawn on your block. Right. Everyone hates that guy.
Right, exactly.
Don't be that guy.
And it's especially when it is so easy. Get Sunday makes it so easy. You just go online and you put in your address, and they tell you exactly what the soil composition is of your neighborhood.
You the sizing of your lawn, so how much of it you'll need. They can tell you what type of grass and soil is being used, so they can tailor it specifically to help your lawn.
Right.
And here's what you do. Sunday, like the day of the week, is offering our listeners 50% off your first box. So you can get started today for as little as $55 when you go to getsunday.com/Gleeman at checkout. That's 50% off your first box at getsunday.com.
They're gonna send you a bag of stuff. You're gonna hook it up to your hose. They're gonna tell you when to put it out there, so you know exactly the weekend to do it. And you're gonna take your thing. Just go to getsunday.com/Gleeman. Get 50%, 50, half off
our other sponsor, Harry's Razors, longtime sponsor. The idea of Harry's Razors is high caliber razors, but they've eliminated the middleman, which A, keeps costs down for you, and B, makes it so that you don't have to physically go to a store and try to convince someone who's already annoyed to go open some case and get you a razor, which inevitably leads to using worn down razors longer than you should because you don't want to go get a new one.
Right.
In this case, couple clicks on their website, new one is shipped to you, beautiful box.
But here's that's the part I want to call out is that it's not just a utilitarian, boring razor, and in fact, right now they've actually redeveloped their razor handles and such. I got a brand new one 2 weeks ago. It looks fantastic. It's the sort of thing you almost want to display in your bathroom. Yeah, it looks so good.
You can get their craft handle starter set for just $10. It includes a craft handle razor, 5-blade German engineered razor cartridge with shaving gel and a travel cover, so it looks nice too.
Yep.
And then you can, from there, if you want to schedule replacement blade delivery whenever you need them, the refills are as low as $2. So all you have to do to elevate your shave with the latest and greatest in Harry's razor handle lineup today is get your $17 craft handle starter set for just $10. Go to harrys.com/Gleeman. That's HARRYS. harrys.com/Gleeman. Okay. Back to Emilio Pagán, and then we'll finish up on him and move to lesser things. But I actually wasn't planning to talk about this first, but okay. We can.
I like getting it out of the way, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Let's see. I had one other. I don't know. It shows how much they miss Thielbar, obviously.
Right.
Because it's fine to say, oh, they'll just move everyone up a spot, but what that means is, God love Brock Stewart. He's looked okay, but I don't know that I'd after 9 pretty good innings, I'm ready to hand him setup duties. And
I think they basically have them.
Right.
I mean, they've had to.
I don't mean they haven't. I mean, It's not ideal to do that. Obviously, they were counting on Alcala being part of this mix, and he just hasn't seemed right all season. He's back on the IL again with a forearm strain, which we'll see what comes from that. And, Pagán then is kind of the natural next guy to bump up into a role in that he's a veteran and he's in the second season with them and he's getting paid $4 million and all this stuff. And, yes, it was kind of specific circumstances that led to him appearing like that in Game 3 of the Dodgers series, and that they had used their bullpen pretty heavily the last several games, and guys were down or guys were limited to only one inning and all that, but it wasn't that special of a circumstance. No, and this is kind of our point that we keep coming back to. What
that means, though, is that it can happen again.
Right.
They're not at the point where they're out of the woods on this.
Right.
Jax is still not Jax, or it hasn't been Jax recently. Thielbar is still on the IL. I'm got another.
He's not going to be ready when he's eligible. Okay. No.
And they're heading into a series facing Trout and Ohtani, and if you end up needing to go deep into the bullpen, they don't have a lot of other great options. That's the one thing you can say about maybe keeping Emilio Pagán, right? Is that
that's always the funniest part, or the most ironic part with Emilio Pagán is he's very durable, and he's also Baldelli talked about this, which is what led to him pitching the third inning in Boston in that disastrous game in April. Which is he told Baldelli, because they talked to him and they said you're not going to be a setup man to begin the year, and he told Baldelli, I pitch whenever you need me, first inning, 9th inning, 15th inning, whatever. Yeah. And they appreciate that, which they should.
Right.
And I've said before a million times, I've been one of Emilio Pagán's most vocal critics. He is a tremendously nice guy.
Yes.
And beyond that, which has no real value in the baseball world, who cares if he's a nice guy other than me, but when he blows a lead, he stands there and he answers questions and he does it in a real way and he doesn't get combative.
He's not a diva.
Right. He's the opposite of that. And so that's that certainly played into why they brought him back.
Sure.
But the part that makes that tough is he's the one who's available the most. And so when they go, ooh, our bullpen's kind of shorthanded, who can pitch 2 innings today? Or who can pitch the 7th instead of the 6th? Well, Emilio's ready to go. He's got a rubber arm. It's like, and then lastly, just to read this stat, because I looked it up, he has the worst win probability added of any reliever in baseball since 2020.
4 years in a row of a negative win probability will do that.
Yes. And no reliever has thrown more innings with a worse ERA since 2020, which goes back to the durable part. And I looked this up because Lavelle tweeted last night in pure Lavelle fashion. I'm working on a column for Sunday. Keep in mind, this was Thursday. I'm working on a column for Sunday, and some of the numbers say Emilio Pagán hasn't been as bad as most people think. And I thought, what a pure Lavelle tweet, which is, I'm going to write something 4 days from now, and I'll get really...
Arguing for a contract extension?
Yeah.
For Emilio Pagán?
Yeah. So I looked this up. Emilio Pagán has the worst career win probability added by any Twins relief pitcher in the last 20 years. Keep in mind, he's been on the team for 1 year and less than 2 months.
Right.
He has the worst win probability added cumulatively in a Twins uniform of any reliever in 20 years. Yeah, and they've had some bad relievers during that time.
Matt Capps, I still get to wake up screaming his name.
And so I keep coming back to, and then I swear we'll move on to the.
I've got one more point I want to bring up.
Okay, hold it. Remember it. But I keep coming back to, there are circumstances with a struggling reliever where I totally understand.
Of course.
Sticking with them.
Right.
For instance, if Duran went through a 2-month bad spell.
We're watching Jax go through it.
Right now. Even Jax to a lesser extent.
Right now we're watching this.
And look, that's subjective. Right. Maybe there are people who feel about Jax the same way that I feel about Pagán and are saying, why are we sticking with him? And I get that. But I would say that the stuff and the underlying numbers and also the luck versus 450-foot home run aspect shades towards Jax's favor. We'll see if that, I mean, maybe a month from now we're sitting here going, boy, Griffin Jax just isn't that good. It was a mistake that they stuck with him. But with, like, there are relievers, because the sample is so small and because the mistakes are so magnified, the bad games are so magnified, because you don't just go 0 for 3 with a couple of strikeouts like you would as a hitter, or it's you blow the game. You lost the game. You're one talking afterward about how you blew the game. And so you do that a few times, and even a great reliever has gone through this. I mean, Joe Nathan even went through this at times. But the reason you stick with relievers is because you say to yourself, well, the sample is small, the stuff is still good, the track record is something we believe in, and if we can get them through this patch, this bad patch, they can come out the other end a really valuable player, and we will be worse long-term if we give up on them. They've clearly taken that stance with Emilio Pagán. I just don't understand what evidence there is that you're waiting for that bad patch to end, because as we've noted, this is the 4th consecutive year and the 5th time in 6 years that he's been a below-average reliever, both in terms of preventing runs and contextually within win probability. And not just bad, but the worst during the last 4 years. And I don't understand. Look, I mean, they already kept him. What I don't understand is, even if you mostly believe in Emilio Pagán, which they clearly did or do, why not just wash your hands of it? You know, blackjack dealer style.
I think you're giving them
and get a different reliever.
You're going into my point, which is does this management team just have trouble admitting a mistake? When the results don't match up to the metrics, I think in general it is probably a good thing, a good philosophy to trust more in the process than the results.
Take a longer picture or a longer term, bigger picture view, and don't react to every bad stretch.
Take a look at the peripheral numbers and the things underneath there that say, no, this is going to work. If you give up especially in the case of something like relievers.
Right. If you give up on every reliever who has a bad month, what you're going to be left with is the worst bullpen in the world and no good relievers, because they all have bad months. Right. 100% agree.
But at some point, there does have to be reach a point where you are like, maybe we're not right. Like maybe the peripheral numbers and our philosophy and these things, there is something we are missing. Right. There is something about this pitcher that we haven't been able to figure out to measure or whatever. And for whatever, or maybe it's just the baseball gods. Well, I don't know. You know,
this is my point.
It's just something going on, right?
Maybe you're not wrong about Emilio Pagán. Maybe it's just been wrong so far for random luck and chance. Now, I don't really believe in that, but for this.
Right. But at what point?
But even if you are right, at some point, go be right about someone else.
And it's not just Pagán. Right. We saw it with Colomé. Right.
Although they chose not to bring back Colomé.
They chose not to bring him back.
They could have. They had an
exactly,
option on him for $5.5 million. I think.
That was I mean, that would, and we actually did debate whether or not they would consider that.
But the same story as Pagán, by the way. Horrible in April. Now, Pagán was horrible in June and July, but then finished on a high note to the point we were like, will they bring him back? But we said the same thing then.
Yes.
Why not just wash your hands of it, chalk it up to a bad experience, and find a similar reliever?
My point is the reason we considered them doing that then was for the same reason, being they just don't like to admit that the peripherals aren't that they're incorrect.
Sure. Especially when they have additional team control.
Right.
They clearly acquired Pagán assuming that they would have him for 2 years, not just 1 year. And when he was horrible in year one, it didn't change their opinion of, well, we have him for year two. Look, maybe from this point forward, Emilio Pagán will be phenomenal. Maybe we'll be sitting here on the same show in August, talking about how
in October
he saved their ass.
Game 6, he came in.
Right. Who could have guessed that Emilio Pagán was going to throw 6 scoreless innings in the ALCS against the Yankees and save their ass? Look, I would. I'm not going to swear because it's not the Patreon. I would effing love to be wrong about that.
Right.
But in the meantime, I just do not understand why this is the hill to die on. Why this is the guy that makes you live through what you've lived through, which is not just a standard bad patch for a reliever.
I like that they're stubborn in general about process over results. Yeah. But at some point, it becomes hubris. It becomes.
I don't know.
It becomes the point where you're just like. Do we just not want to admit that we were wrong?
It's almost. I'm not saying that's not the motivation here, but we've gotten to the point after trying to figure this out all off season and talking to people on and off the record about it all off season. I've gotten to the point where I can't even like conceptualize in my head what I think their motivation is for it.
Right.
It's gotten that far.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Where I'm just like, there is no logical, in my opinion, they clearly disagree, but there is no logical chain of decision-making events that leads you to this other than just, I don't effing know. I don't get it. And I will also say this. It's not Emilio Pagán's fault that he keeps getting put into these situations. Now, it's his fault that he struggles, obviously. But if they kept him in low-leverage situations, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
But that's also
the problem is it's almost impossible to keep him, or any reliever, in an 8-man bullpen where 4 or 5 get used anytime you have a lead. It's impossible to truly hold a guy back, particularly when they usually have a long reliever who's also being held back, and they usually have someone like Alcala who's kind of getting worked back in slowly. So in reality, he's closer to the middle of the bullpen than the back of the bullpen.
If he would have signed with somebody else as a free agent this year, right? Maybe a $3 million contract with somebody.
Yeah.
And he had the year that he had right now, which they'd be like, it happens.
Well, right.
You know what I mean?
That's kind of a...
He's had 2 bad outings, but mostly he's been pretty good.
But what was lost?
And we didn't expect that much. He was a 6th or 7th guy or something like that.
Well, but that goes back to... It's a different way of saying what I've been saying now a million times. I swear we're going to move on. I say that. That's going to be on our T-shirt. I swear we're going to move on. But that's a different way of saying it. Like, let's say they had cut Emilio Pagán and he'd gone somewhere else and signed for $3.5 million, or they had traded him, which they claim they could have done, and maybe can still do. Who knows? And he was working a 6th or 7th inning role, and you look at his numbers and you go, well, they're not great, but really it's just 2 bad outings. And do you think the Twins would live in great regret of that they didn't have that? That's what I don't get. Is like, let's flip this and say you did cut him, and he went on to have a good for him season. Is that going to be like David Ortiz going to the Red Sox? No, it's going to be like, I don't even know what it was. Like, who cares? Find another reliever. So anyway, that's Emilio Pagán.
It's not even Brandon Kinsler being traded away.
What is the? Oh no, he was a decent setup man somewhere else. I don't understand it. I really don't. And I know there are people in that clubhouse, including Emilio Pagán, and there are people in the press box, including Dan Hayes, who think I've been overly harsh on Pagán. And my point always is, I have absolutely nothing against him personally. In fact, I think he's a tremendous guy. I've talked basketball with him on many occasions. I think he's a stand-up guy.
Our criticism isn't so much of Pagán, but it isn't even of Baldelli.
But if you're saying to yourself,
using Pagán,
Well, yeah. I mean, but yeah, Baldelli's not the one keeping him on the roster. Baldelli's not the one that gave him $3.5 million.
He's the one who gets stuck with, I have to get to my sixth best reliever has to be out there right now because that's who I've got left.
Right. Who else?
And that is going to be Pagán.
But here, I'll tell you what I tell Dan, which is if you think I am obsessed with tweeting negative things or writing negative things about Emilio Pagán, that's because he won't stop doing negative things. All I'm doing is tweeting out his updated numbers. And the fact that they only get worse and worse and worse is not my fault. I'm representing the reality. So that's where I'm at with him. I find myself at times like being a weird defender of him because the criticism does get too harsh. But anyway, ultimately, here's where we are. And I'm sure now they'll kick him back to a low leverage role as we've seen 5 different times since last year. And he'll gradually work his way up, or there'll come a circumstance where the bullpen's not rested and he's got to be in a tie game.
Perhaps everybody will get healthy and some of the arms at St. Paul, Blazovic comes up here and blows people away or something like that.
Well, there aren't really... I mean, we see Brock Stewart, who was the one guy at St. Paul that people in St. Paul were going, this guy's legit right now. And, yeah, maybe Balazovic can be that shortly. There's some other, Simeon Woods-Richardson, if he were to move to the bullpen, I think could be potentially
maybe Ronnie
good.
Enriquez, he's back.
Ronnie Enriquez is definitely, he struck out 4 and 2 scoreless yesterday.
But there is a little wish casting. What we are doing right now is wish casting.
But that's part of why that landscape of right-handed relievers is part of why in December we were like, why don't they just go spend $5 million on a decent right-handed reliever? Okay, so let's move on.
The other aspect of that game was injuries.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the other half of why it was one of the crummiest games of the season.
That's true. So you lose the war and the battle. No, you lose the fight and the war. I don't remember what it is. Adding insult to injury. Adding injury to insult really is what it was.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a few different things. So since last we spoke on this show, the free show, Kepler went on the IL for a hamstring strain, a mild hamstring strain, and Larnach replaced him.
Yeah.
Also, since last we spoke, Royce Lewis's rehab moved from AA Wichita to AAA St. Paul, where he played third base last night. I think went 0 for 3 or something like that. He played third base, and Miranda played first base last night, which is interesting. And the clock is ticking on Lewis's rehab window, which is basically running parallel to the 60-day injured list eligibility, which I believe, I don't know the exact date, but it's either the 30th or the 31st of this month. He is the time he would be eligible for the Twins to activate him from the injured list. And
then I know that the rehab assignment has to be over. The 30th is the last day of that. Right.
And so they lined it up that way intentionally, obviously. And that doesn't mean that come the 31st, is there 31 days in May?
Yeah, 31, yeah.
I had to do the 30 days has September, April, June, and November, all the rest.
Looking at your knuckles.
Yeah. I don't have that many fingers to count. I had to do toes. And anyway, let's just call it June 1st. On June 1st, that doesn't mean that he has to be activated and called up. That means they have to activate him, or they don't have to activate him, but the rehab assignment comes to a close. You would typically activate him, but it could be an Alex Kirilloff situation where they activate him and option him to AAA. And then he goes from being a rehabbing major leaguer to just a AAA player.
Right.
But if he's playing well and he looks healthy, and it certainly looks that way right now, he's hit a couple homers. He's stolen 3 bases already. He's playing third base and shortstop. There's nothing really blocking him, his path to being the starting third baseman. Unless Kyle Farmer just has an incredible 2 more weeks, which he's looked good so far since coming back.
Right.
But I think it would make the team better to have Lewis as your primary third baseman with some Kyle Farmer in there, because they're not going to play Royce Lewis 7 days a week, obviously, initially. And use Farmer to give Polanco a break at second, to give Correa a break at short. He can play some first base. He can be a pinch hitter against left-handed pitchers, all that sort of stuff. That's the role they kind of envisioned for him coming out of spring training.
And all you're doing is sending Willie Castro to AAA, which is probably where Willie Castro should be spending some time, right?
Or not even, now that Gordon's on the IL, which we're about to talk about here. So also in yesterday's game at Dodger Stadium, Nick Gordon fouled the ball off his shin and was down in, looked like horrible pain for several moments. Then kind of hopped around and talked himself into staying in the game with Nick Paparesta, the trainer, and Rocco Baldelli, which is generally pretty difficult to do with that duo or any duo. Stayed in the game. Was, I think, a 2-2 count at that point?
It's actually not that hard to talk them into letting you finish the at-bat. It's tough to talk them into letting you come back out of the dugout.
That's what I do always say that. There's no way this guy's making it back out of the dugout. Guy defensively, Kepler will dive or something, and they'll call it and look at him, and they'll leave him out. But then the inning will end. He'll go into the dugout, and I'll say, there's no shot this guy's making his way out of the dugout. Yeah, you're right about that.
That's right, yeah.
So he then gets one pitch and swings at it, and swings through a fastball, strike 3, and looked like someone shot him in the leg, basically.
Right, yeah.
And it turns out after the game, he has a fractured shin. He stayed in the game with a fractured shin, and it took at least one swing with a fractured shin. Now, we haven't heard a specific timetable yet. I'm sure they want to get him home and have him go to their doctors and stuff. But he ain't going to be back soon from a fractured shin. And it sounds like the corresponding roster move for him going on the IL later today will be Kyle Garlick, who we mentioned earlier, coming up from AAA, who's already on the 40-man roster. He has spent big parts of the last 2 seasons with the Twins and was actually with them for like a week earlier this season. Yep. Right-handed hitting outfielder, much different than Nick Gordon stylistically.
Right, exactly right.
But fills a role that he can start 2 times a week, let's say, when they're going to face a lefty, which they are facing a couple times in this Angel series.
That's my theory on why Garlick is on this team. Is the first 2 starters versus the Twins and the Angels are both southpaws.
Giants, too, one of the games.
Is that right,
come back here. There's another lefty there. So that's that move. Now, also in that game, Polanco left with what they're calling a mild hamstring strain. And Gallo left after fouling a ball off his shin, basically.
Right.
Almost the same spot as Gordon.
Right.
And they were initially worried that he also fractured his shin because it swelled up immediately. Right. But x-rays showed no fracture, and they seem, I'm not even going to say optimistic, hopeful that
right.
he could avoid the IL. But yesterday was an off day, so they'll see what everybody looks like today at the ballpark. If Gallo goes on the IL, my assumption is that it would be Matt Wallner who replaces him.
Yeah,
if Polanco goes on the IL, my assumption would be Edward Julian would replace him.
I want to respond to that, but I'm going to do that after we hit our last 2 sponsors.
I will respond to that, but just a moment.
I'm going to cite this particular case. We should talk a little bit about catching baseball games at Target Field. One of the ways you can do it is you can snag some tickets on Game Time, because Game Time has tickets that are available at the last minute, and they're very cheap.
Their specialty is sort of hard to find or last minute tickets.
That's
you're
right.
saying, how am I going to get these? Go look on the Game Time app.
Yeah. But, I mean, listen, I get people asking me all the time, hey, I want to catch the game at Target Field. What's the best way to get tickets? And I'll be honest with you, the best way to get tickets to Target Field is from a third-party vendor right now.
Yeah.
I mean,
look at the Game Time app as you're walking to Target Field.
That's exactly
or as you're pre-gaming.
We literally do that.
I know.
Yeah, we do that. Actually, we do that from the craft brewery a half an hour before the game at Target Field. I think I found tickets to the last. I had to buy 3 tickets to Target Field because we've got season tickets, but we were bringing like 3 friends. I think they were $3 a piece.
Right.
And now, there's fees on top of that. There is for every ticket broker. But we have found the Game Time app to be absolutely reliable in that end, and that, they're delivered to you immediately electronically. It could not be easier.
So you can snag the tickets without the stress with the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, just create an account, and you use the code Gleeman, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account and redeem the code Gleeman for $20 off. That's download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And then our last sponsor.
If you join Gleeman and the Geek here before we actually start recording, a lot of times our conversation is about bets I have been making with various power troopers.
Yeah.
About won another $50 from Sauce the other day, by the way. But
I hope
not everybody has a built-in group of friends that are degenerate gamblers.
But now that MLB is back, MyBookie can be your one-stop shop for all your betting needs with a wide range of betting options, including money lines, run totals, futures. MyBookie gives you plenty of ways to bet on your favorite team and players.
You can also take advantage of brand name MyBookie Moneybag, which gives you a chance to secure a bet on your favorite team or player at insanely boosted odds. Just sign up today at MyBookie and use the promo code Gleeman to secure a first deposit bonus of up to $1,000. It's simple. You just deposit $200 and suddenly you'll be playing with $300 instantly. Just use the promo code Gleeman to claim your bonus.
So if you're a baseball fan looking to add some excitement to the season, look no further than MyBookie. Sign up now and get ready to experience the thrill of baseball betting like never before. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. Okay. You were going to do your debate club response.
What was your point?
Well, you're not that much of a debater. You're supposed to take notes.
I'm wondering if Miranda might not replace Gallo at first base.
But Gallo hasn't been playing first base.
Yeah, he's been playing a little bit, but you got Kirilloff and Larnach in the corner outfield spots, right? They're both on the team right now. So
right, but Kirilloff's been playing mostly first base.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
I mean, you could, but Miranda hasn't hit yet at AAA. He's like hitting.
Part of the reason you've been having that is because Gallo's superior. You gain more in defense from Gallo out in left field than you do from Kirilloff in left field, and you don't lose that much from Kirilloff versus Gallo at first base necessarily, right?
Well, right, but
that seems like
goes against what you're saying. Now you're suggesting putting Kirilloff in the outfield where you just said he's not very good.
Yeah, but my point is I'm not sure that you trust Wallner out in left field the same way that you trust.
Can I have a follow up in this debate club? Yes, do you trust Jose Miranda as your everyday first baseman? Yeah, that's what I thought. Ding! Gleeman wins that round. Debate club, baby. And I never even did that because that's for nerds.
I was on the speech team. I was not on the debate team.
I don't think we had a debate club or a speech. Poor Highland. We were lucky we had doors and windows and desks.
I'm sure you didn't on the stalls.
Yeah, I've told this story before, but my high school, Highland Park Senior High School in St. Paul, they locked the bathrooms during class. So you couldn't just...
You could only go at pastime?
Well, you needed to get someone to unlock them because we had police officers roaming one per floor.
I don't think I've ever heard this.
If you had a pass, you could get them to open the bathroom. But if you were cool and you were just in the hallway without a pass, you just had to pee on yourself, basically. That was your only chance. Anyway, but this is my first debate club win. Yes.
Yeah, we'll see.
Now, the quality of competition.
We'll have to see if Gallo actually gets put on the IL. That would be the deciding point.
Yeah. Debate club is theoretical, though, right? Like, it's like scenarios.
I guess
that you're talking. So I don't care if Miranda actually gets called up. I still chalk it up as a win. You know me. So obviously they're hoping that both Gallo and Polanco can avoid the IL, even if they miss couple games here in Anaheim, but the goal would be have them ready for Monday when San Francisco comes to town. It's...
I don't love that.
Well, right, but people always say that, but like there are certainly instances where I think Max Kepler clouds this too much.
Well, maybe
because Max Kepler will always take 3 days.
Here's what clouds it too much. 25 years of being a Twins fan and watching them carry guys on the roster that are hurt for way too long when you're never really sure when they're coming back. Now, Kepler's a really good example at one end of that extreme, but Polanco, as coming back it took him an extra few weeks to come back from injury. My guess is he could probably use about 10 days off. So.
Yeah, except he's been great the last week.
Yeah, he has been great. Yep.
So's Gallo.
Yep.
Gallo's got 3 homers in his last 4 games or whatever.
He's been fantastic.
It's look, they show up at the ballpark today and they can't walk. Go ahead and put them on the IL. I'm certainly not going to argue against that. I'm just saying, it's not a Twins only thing to give guys 2 or 3 days.
No, agreed. And I'm not totally opposed to them giving him, a couple days. But if you get to the point where you can't backdate it,
John
3 days
is pushing so hard for Jose Miranda everyday first baseman. You liked what you saw last year, huh? The ball's going through his legs.
What I do like. I do like the idea of having Edouard Julien play some second base.
Well, that I agree with.
Right? And so I don't understand, again, what the big downside. I mean, I know what the big downside is. Polanco's a hell of a player, right? Don't get me wrong. But it's not like they're going from Polanco to to a lot of Willie Castro at second base. So
true. But, yeah, I mean... You're not like
ding.
No, debate club's over. Don't laugh. First of all, that kick you out for laughing. It's a serious matter. Debate club.
By the way, in debate club they don't have a bell. I don't think. I'm almost sure I don't.
Well, that's not as fun.
Ding.
No, I bring my own. Ding. One of the at a hotel.
Yeah, that's right.
Lobby desk.
That's right. Yeah.
That's when I check in. Ding, ding. Yeah. I win. Ding.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Always so much is made of, why did you wait? You ended up putting him on the IL anyway, so why did you let him stay on the active roster for 2 or 3 days?
Right.
Now, 4 or 5 days, yeah. 2 or 3 days, I get. But not as much as made of, well, actually, this guy was ready on day 4, but you decided to immediately place him on the L, so then you lost him for 6 games, which is the same or worse, obviously.
Well, and I'm less worried about the Gallo thing because he's not playing the first 2 games of this series anyway, probably. They're facing left-handers the first couple games.
Yeah, but you're not going to want Ed Julian's not some big asset against lefties at second base. He's a lefty. You're probably not even going to. You're probably going to see like Willie Castro at second base. But yeah, that's fine. I do think those will be the moves if a move is needed. The Gallo thing, we mentioned he's got a bunch of homers lately. The Joey Gallo reluctant leadoff hitter has been very funny to watch because we started to see it. He started it in at home before they went on this series. And the first time they did it, which I guess was the last game of the series or the second to last game of the homestand.
It must have been the second to last because you guys talked to him about it.
And he had played, I think, 781 games in the majors, I want to say, over 9 years, and had never started as a leadoff hitter. Right. And Baldelli was asked, what made you do that? And he goes, I don't know, just decided. I mean, obviously, Kepler going on the IL forced it a little bit, and the fact that they want Polanco in the middle of the lineup and not the top of the lineup, because then once those are in place, those 2 things, who's a leadoff candidate, really?
Right.
Kyle Farmer, Willie Castro, Michael Taylor? No, not really.
We wrestled with this in the offseason.
Right.
When we were debating who's going to end up being the leadoff
Once
hitter.
you trade Luis Ariz, you don't really have an obvious leadoff guy. Now, they hope Julian could be that long-term or Royce Lewis could be that long-term. But today, they decided to go with Gallo, and the funny thing about that was Gallo hates the idea of leading off.
Of course.
Like, outwardly, we'll talk about how much he hates it. But I think they kind of like that, not because they're screwing with him, but because I think there's a feeling with Gallo that he's a guy who gets in his own head a little bit. And Baldelli even said this, if you can kind of send his brain scrambling a little bit, the result is often good and not bad.
Yeah. It's like a reboot.
Yeah, it's like a reboot, or it kind of forces him to live in the moment as opposed to obsessing about whatever. And he goes out there and he starts for the first time. He homers at Target Field. And then after, it's like, boy, I guess you're a leadoff hitter now. And he's like, yeah, don't tell Rocco that. Like, I don't want that. And then he does it again. Homers in a second game. And then for a third time in, 5 games as a leadoff guy or whatever, did it on this road series. And I wasn't on the road, but I read Doe's article talking to him. And he's like, well, I don't want to say I don't want to do it, but I don't want to do it. And it's like, but nobody seems to care. And I don't envision him. And in fact, like,
well, and we actually got a question sometimes we get them when we do our Patreon. We have all mailbags, right? When people
usually
send
the Wednesday
to
morning
exclusive inbox
episode is mailbag questions,
right? But I get questions sent to me other ways, right? And one of them was sort of like, who are the divas on the Twins, or who are more arrogant guys? And one of the names that was brought, the 4 names that they threw out, I'm not even going to say what they were because they were all wrong. Like none of those 4 were any of the guys that I would have called a diva on this team. But one of them was Gallo.
Yeah,
and
he's about as far from a diva as anybody I've ever met in my entire
life. So
when
we say he doesn't want to do it or he's complaining about it or something, he's doing it in a joking manner.
He's literally laughing as he's saying
that's
this.
That's right. Yes, he's just like he's self-mocking himself as a leadoff hitter essentially.
Joey Gallo is like I guess you'd call him, I don't know, if you're like doing the grease classifications for high school kids.
Okay.
He's a meathead. But he's like 6'5", and he's built like a brick ass house, and he's an incredible athlete, and he's been a superstar athlete since he was 14 probably.
Right. But a jovial meathead.
But yeah, right. He is I think he would probably even say like I'm a jock.
Right, yeah.
But he's funny and very, very self-aware.
Right.
Which is why they kind of want to scramble his brain a little bit. Right. And very self-deprecating.
Yes.
And very informal in the sense that he will drop F-bombs constantly on camera, which I appreciate. So yeah, diva is not how I would describe Joey Gallo at all. No, he's the opposite of that. Right. I mean, if he were a true diva, Baldelli wouldn't be making light of saying he doesn't want to do it, but we're going to make him do it. Right. And then the other thing that works into that is Baldelli said that the actual idea was first broached of Gallo leading off during spring training, which we saw him lead off actually half dozen times probably during spring training while I was there. And Baldelli said that the idea of that came from bench coach Jace Tingler, who was a coach in the Rangers organization when A, Gallo was a prospect coming up and then a young star player for them, and then B, Thad Levine was the assistant GM at that time in Texas. And I think Tingler is viewed by the Twins as sort of like a Gallo whisperer. And Baldelli's like, I haven't really heard if he hates leading off directly. Jace just follows him around all day and then tells me the stuff he says to curse me, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I do think this
Baldelli has also said straight up, like, when Gallo is talking to people, you don't want to leave. You know, he wants to be there when he hears Gallo talking. Yeah. So he's got that personality.
So, you know, do I think that Joey Gallo in the leadoff spot is a good fit? Not really. Is it going to be something that we're going to see a month from now still? Probably not. Is it because of that he's hitting 3 home runs and blah, blah, blah? Probably not. It's probably all coincidence. Who knows?
Right?
Yeah. I do think, though, that...
But when crap works...
Right. I mean, I think...
It's similar when it doesn't work, they should maybe make a change. I mean, which we just talked about for the first 45 minutes of this podcast.
Well, we also talk a lot about how the lineup, the analysis of batting order is so overdone.
Right.
And the difference between Joey Gallo batting 5th versus batting 1st has the leadoff spot has this big importance to it. Well, all they're saying is he's the first guy up, and he's going to get more plate appearances than everyone. Well, he leads the team in OPS right now. Yeah. So when you want him getting the most plate appearances of everyone, and maybe that leads to a few more get-me-over fastballs in his first at-bat, because pitchers are just trying to start the game by getting ahead. Maybe it leads to scrambling his brain a little bit. I also just think people look at a low batting average and a high strikeout rate, and they go, oh, my God, that would be horrible in the leadoff spot. But really, what you're looking for in the leadoff spot are 3 things, really. Speed, which he's not a burner, but none of the other options, really. They're not going to hit Michael Taylor in the leadoff spot. Right. You're looking for on-base skills, which he draws a ton of walks.
Right.
He's drawn 100 walks in multiple seasons. He has second most walks on the team right now. 330 on base for his career, despite hitting like 199 or whatever it is. And just overall production, which he's leading the Twins in OPS. So why not put that guy at the top of the lineup? So, I don't expect it to continue. I think Royce Lewis, part of what makes Royce Lewis so appealing and why we're, tracing this path of, in 2 weeks he could be with the Twins is because A, they have a spot at third base that needs filling.
Yeah. No
offense to Kyle Farmer, but it needs filling. And then B, you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone if Royce Lewis is leading off there.
Yeah, that's true.
And Julian, same thing, long term.
We should just mention that is one of the more exciting things about Royce Lewis on this rehab assignment is that he's been stealing bases.
Yeah.
I don't know if we mentioned that when you were talking about some of the things he's been doing at Wichita at St. Paul.
It's exciting in the sense that he's successfully stolen them, which suggests, well, we don't have sprint speeds at AA and AAA or whatever. We don't have a fully accurate, although I talked to a scout who watched him at AA and, timing him with a stopwatch and all that and said he's not quite back to where he was, but he's doing pretty damn well for 2 torn ACLs. But it's almost more encouraging that he wants to try to steal bases.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
That he's not afraid of what he has done to that knee.
Right.
Right.
Immediately.
He feels comfortable. Right.
Yeah, not waiting a couple weeks to do it. Right. Like he's running early and often.
Especially for somebody who's ahead of schedule.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had a few other notes on the lineup. So, the Lewis probably going to be viewed similar to Kirilloff, which is they'll evaluate his production and his health, and then also, is Farmer hitting 350 at that point?
Right,
There's less of a need at that point. Or is somebody else injured?
Or maybe that changes Royce Lewis's role. Maybe he's not the everyday third baseman. Maybe he's the guy that's bopping around between second base, shortstop, and
when I thought Miranda would still have the third base job right now.
Right.
I envisioned Royce Lewis returning in June or July. He's a little ahead of schedule, like you said. And I thought, well, a super utility role will kind of make sense here. Have him play some third. He can back up short. He can play some second. He can play some center. But it sounds like he's maybe not that keen on playing the outfield, which is understandable given that that's how he got. Right. He re-injured himself. And he's not playing second on the rehab assignment because they have Julian at second at AAA. So I don't know. I thought a utility. I mean, I still think center field is the best bet for him long term, but it doesn't sound like he or the Twins agree with that.
Especially given some of the stuff that's going on right now on the Twins roster.
Right,
you lose Nick Gordon, and Taylor's got a bad back. I'm a little worried about what the answer is for center field here. We talked a little bit about, Joey Gallo maybe spending some time there, but Joey Gallo's out there with a banged up shin now too.
Right,
and then we get to perhaps. Is Buxton maybe an option in center field here again if things turn south? Or Royce Lewis would be another option.
I think you might see, I don't know, Mark Contreras.
Yeah, well, that's what I was actually. I was
having a good start at
year
at AAA.
You won't see Celestino because Celestino still isn't back, right? I don't think he's playing in St. Paul yet.
Close to return.
No, yeah.
Yeah, he had major wrist surgery, torn wrist ligament. Let's see. I had a couple other. I want to make sure I hit everything. We talked about Kepler on the Patreon, so we won't get super heavy into that. He could be back during this upcoming homestand. He generally returns soon from the IL. The two things you know about Max Kepler, as it relates to injuries, is he has a lot of nagging injuries. This is his 7th time going on the IL since September of 2020. So in roughly 3 years, 7th time. Almost all of them, other than he got COVID once, almost all of them have been like soft tissue injuries, which are generally day-to-day, not month-to-month. And in almost every case, the Twins and Kepler say it's day-to-day, and we think he could play tomorrow. In this case, they immediately said after the game, it's just a leg cramp. He could play tomorrow.
Right.
And in fact, he did pinch hit the next day and then didn't stay in defensively and then went run on the IL the next day. What we know about him is, at this point, he is very much not into playing at less than 100%. And that's fine. I don't think that's like a moral failure or anything, but it is part of the equation with Kepler when he leaves the game with a minor injury. And I think what changed this time around is that the Twins have been through this same dance with him before, including this season, but multiple times last season and multiple times the year before, where it looks to them like a day-to-day injury, and he says to them, yeah, I'll see if I can play tomorrow. And going back to our conversation of putting someone on the IL immediately or not, I think the difference between Kepler versus Polanco or Gallo, who we were just talking about under similar circumstances, is they've gotten to the point where they know now that giving Kepler 3 or 4 days doesn't help anything.
Right.
Because he will tell you, well, let's see how I am tomorrow, and then let's see how I am tomorrow, and then let's see where I am tomorrow. So I think in this case, they viewed it as a mild hamstring strain. They might have, with any other player, given him until roughly now, or maybe yesterday or something, to figure it out, but they just decided with him, nope, we're going to shut him down. We're not doing this again. And they brought up Larnach. Now, having a guy as good as Larnach available to call up played a part in that, obviously. If it was Mark Contreras, no offense to Mark.
It's a little bit of a luxury. Right?
It's a little bit of a luxury. But the other thing we do know with Kepler is he does return from the IL typically when eligible. Now, that speaks to the nature of the injury and perhaps the thought that he could have stayed off the IL. But and so we're relatively close to him coming off the IL.
It would be Tuesday he could come off the IL, which is
possible.
Which with Gallo, maybe maybe he sticks around for 3-4 days, and maybe that's what they end up doing. They just end up swapping those two out.
Right, something like that. Now
Larnach is 4 for 16, but 2 of those 4 are home runs.
Yeah.
In his absence,
it would feel kind of cruel. I'm not saying they can't do this, but it would feel a little cruel to send down Larnach for Kirilloff, call him back up 4 games later for Kepler, watch him hit a couple of home runs.
Do well versus the right-handed pitchers, but it turns out they run into their first streak of consistent left-handed pitching.
And then say to him, well, Kepler's back, so you're just right back to St. Paul again.
Right.
That's not crazy or anything, but it doesn't seem great. Unfortunately, though, like you mentioned, Gordon had been seeing more and more action in center field because I think Michael Taylor's a little bit banged up. And they had kind of formed a little bit of a platoon out there with Gordon being the left-handed hitting portion of it. That's obviously out the window. Now, you could play Gallo some in center, like you mentioned, except now he's banged up. Yeah. And also, he hasn't started in center. Like, I don't know that they view him at this stage of his career. I think he's 30. He's lost a lot of speed. Like, I don't know that he's really viable in center. Kepler is and has been somewhat viable in center, but has been so hesitant to play there. That his not playing center, I think, is more about his preference than the Twins' preference. And I don't mean playing center like he would have been the opening day center fielder instead of Michael Taylor. I just mean in a circumstance like this, where if he comes off the IL Tuesday and Gordon is now out for a month or more, you might say, well, could you start twice a week in center field, kind of paired with Michael Taylor? And I think their view of Kepler is he just isn't willing to do that, rightly or wrongly or whatever. So that's part of what makes the roster a little tricky once Kepler comes back, because none of those left-handed bats, obviously Larnach is not going to play center field, so none of those left-handed bats can kind of fill that Gordon role. Now, Willie Castro can play some center field, but that doesn't necessarily fix anything either, because then you're still heavy on outfielders. And the one guy who can play some third base, some shortstop, some second base is Willie Castro. Right. Except if you're using him in center field, then who's your backup infielder at that point? Because Gordon also kind of filled that in an emergency role and doesn't really fill that.
I wouldn't be shocked if Garlick is up for a few days,
right,
and then Mark Contreras is called up.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, that feels to me like a natural fit there for Gordon, in that he's a left-handed hitting guy who can play center field. You've seen somewhat of, like you mentioned, somewhat of a platoon right now with Taylor and Gordon, not because they view it as a really good platoon opportunity, but because it feels like they're trying to keep Taylor healthy with his back.
I mean, I do also think they were wanting to get Gordon some consistent at bats, because his playing time had shrunk in the corners.
Well, once Polanco got called up, once Polanco got called up, he couldn't really play second base, which is where he'd been playing all the time.
For that matter, Look, his overall numbers are still horrendous, Gordon, for the year, because he got off to a 4 for 50 start or whatever. Right. But he had a couple of homers. He had some key moments. He had some good hits, better at bats. So it removes that, and
that seems like a good position to put Contreras into. I mean, not that you're trying to gear everything towards Mark Contreras.
No, but stylistically, he fills Gordon's spot better than anyone else you would have in the organization.
In terms of center field, right?
Center field or the corners. He's very good. Great arm. Can play center. Great in the corners.
Has been playing center quite a bit in St. Paul, I think.
Has power, but a high strikeout guy, but is played really well for a month and a half in St. Paul. Yeah, so I think Contreras, he's not on the 40-man roster, but they can make room on the 40-man roster. I could see that. Obviously it depends a little on Gallo and Polanco too.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's possible Gallo goes on the IL and they call up Contreras instead of Matt Wallner. That's also a possibility.
A really good point. Yep.
Let's see. I had one other thing I wanted to talk about. Okay. So on the pitching side, they also swapped out Alcala, who went back on the IL, for Jose De Leon, who looked phenomenal through about 5 batters against LA, including slicing up Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and Will Smith. Right. Then gave up back-to-back hits with 2 outs, and then that led to the 40-minute Pagán discussion that we just had, which Pagán came in for him. But I don't know. I don't know how long whenever they call up a new last man in the bullpen, it's always unclear. Is this guy just up as a fresh arm, and as soon as he pitches, he's going to get sent back down? Or are they going to try to actually let him get a foothold here and maybe stick around for a little bit? I don't know exactly where Jose De Leon fits in that. I think he's intriguing enough from a track record standpoint, performance standpoint, and stuff standpoint to give him some opportunities. But he might just be, the Cole Sands, Brent Hedrick, Josh Winder, fill in the blank, just kind of churn and burn through the long relief.
When they called him up, he wasn't on the 40-man roster, right?
No.
Okay.
He's someone to watch. The other 2 things, let's see, I wanted to make sure I hit one other thing. Sorry about this. We can talk about Correa. I feel like this is just a topic every week that we could do. It seems more and more with Correa. I'm not going to mention the word confidence other than right there. But it seems more and more with Correa that he's taking strikes and then swinging through fastballs late in counts, which there hasn't been a lot about his performance this season that has been encouraging, but I think this recent stretch is maybe to me the least encouraging or the most discouraging, which is that he just seems backward at the plate right now, which is they get ahead of him by throwing a couple strikes because he's trying to be patient. He's trying to work at bats. He's trying undoubtedly to get into some hitters' counts. And then whether he's in a hitter's count or it's 2-2, 1-2, whatever, then he just gets a fastball over the plate and just swings through it. Yeah. And, he's been unlucky this year, but he hasn't been that unlucky this year. Like he should be hitting 235, not 195. Right. That is unlucky, but we'd still be having a similar conversation if he had his expected numbers also. But the discouraging part to me is there's been stretches where he's hitting for power and he actually has come through with some big home runs and he's driving the ball and he's pulling the ball, but then that hasn't really been the case of late. Yeah. Now we're splicing these 6 weeks into sections of 10 games, so you're going to run into stretches for every player. But it's the swinging through fastballs part to me and the taking strikes part to me that in tandem is the most discouraging, because that suggests to me either one of two things, or maybe both. One, a hitter who's just lost at the plate, who's just backwards. He's trying to do something and can't accomplish it, and what ends up happening is he's just on his heels the whole time, basically. He's at the mercy of the pitcher. And then two is when he is getting fastballs over the plate, which any player at Correa's level, an all-star caliber, $200 million star player, they knock the hell out of fastballs and have every year and will every year if they're right. And so the fact that he is not hitting fastballs and not just not hitting them but swinging through them so often over the plate, you look at that and you go well, there's no luck involved in that. That's just worrisome to me.
One of the reasons that I did not think Miranda would be sent down when Kyle Farmer was called up, why I thought they might opt for Willie Castro instead, was because I thought... Correa has played every game at shortstop this year except for the 4-game stretch in which he was clearly out with a bad back.
Yeah, the second week of April or something like that. He missed 4 games.
He missed 4 games, right? But ever since Farmer has been hurt, ever since Farmer got hurt, he's played every game at shortstop.
Right.
Every one, right? And last year there was a lot of talk early in the season about trying to keep Correa fresh by bringing him and resting him, including you get a complete day off. We're not going to ask you to pinch hit, even if it's the 10th inning when it's an obvious pinch hitting opportunity. Baldelli caught a crap load of heat for that, right?
Yeah.
And now instead, because maybe it's because he's trying to live up to the contract, or maybe it's because Farmer was out and he didn't think they had a great other person to play shortstop or whatever it's been, he's been playing every day. And so when he was struggling 2 weeks ago, I was sort of I think it might be just because he's worn down a little bit. I don't know if it's mentally worn down or physically worn down, etc. Right? And that's one of the reasons why I thought that they would keep Miranda up, because that way you can have Farmer giving people a break, right? Now, if anybody's getting a break, it's Willie Castro is giving people a break.
I was surprised to see, because they removed Correa for a pinch runner in one of the LA games, which worked. Castro came around to score. And then when they needed to align defensively, it was Castro who stayed at shortstop and Farmer who played at third base.
Yeah, it surprised me too.
Which is interesting to me because, A, Willie Castro is not a good shortstop. I've seen him enough with the Tigers to know that. And B, Kyle Farmer was the Reds' starting shortstop for the past 2 years, or 80% of the past. And they initially traded for him as their starting shortstop until they figured out what the Correa situation was.
Obviously. Now,
so it's
the Royce Lewis thing coming up could in fact shuffle the deck a little bit more.
I 100%.
But that is still 2 weeks away.
Right.
2 weeks of him playing every day at shortstop again.
Yeah, I agree.
While he's working his way through this.
My assumption is that the reason Lewis, he's clearly prepping to play third base for the Twins. But the reason that he's kind of alternating between third and short while on this rehab assignment, first with Wichita and now with St. Paul, is A, they feel like he's the most comfortable at shortstop, obviously. And so they want him to just kind of get his feet under him, literally and figuratively, and get reps and be comfortable and feel like, he's back in the mix in a familiar territory as a player. But I also think, B, they've not given up on him being a major league caliber shortstop. They've probably roughly given up on him being a major league starting shortstop because of Correa's presence. But I do think in their kind of idealized roster situation, maybe not this year, but next year and beyond, he would be the backup shortstop. He might be the starting third baseman or the starting second baseman, but also the backup shortstop. And I think having that would be good, that you could give Correa a day off or a day at DH or a partial day off where he pinch hits, and you have Royce Lewis at shortstop, which is a big difference from, Nick Gordon or Willie Castro or even Kyle Farmer at this point at shortstop. Yeah. But yeah, part of me wonders, because people have seen Correa in the dugout. They showed on TV. He's wearing a heat pad on his back between innings and all that. I think, to your point, is he playing through it because they feel like the backup options are not good? Is he trying to just live up to the contract? All of that could be true. I also just think he's trying to fight through this.
Right.
And I think in his mind, rightly or wrongly, he feels like a day off isn't helping anything. Right. I need hits. I need at-bats. I need to start playing.
That might be too. He might be grinding a little much.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's...
Probably, and to be fair, he's also he's such an asset defensively.
He has played well defensively.
Yeah, so we keep dwelling on his hitting, and his hitting has absolutely been a liability, especially at the top of the lineup there, where he's consistently better than the number 2 spot or whatever. But I still feel so much more comfortable with him at shortstop than I do with anybody else on this roster.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, Farmer is an okay shortstop, but I think, you can see him playing third.
Right.
He's got a good arm, but he doesn't have a great arm. He's got some range, but he's more of a sure-handed option at shortstop. But okay, a couple other things, and we'll be done. The Twins have finally started to do a little running. Yes. They had 1 steal in their first 22 games. I believe now they have either 15 or 16 steals in the last 22 games at a pretty good rate. Now, most of that is just Michael Taylor continuing to run and Byron Buxton deciding now to run.
Are the Dodgers catchers known to be not particularly good at stopping stolen bases?
I don't think so.
I mean, it definitely looked like that was a focus for them in this 3-game series.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was the first time Buxton stole 2 bases in a game since 2018. Now, health is
Buxton is back.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's on your notes, but good Lord, he's been back on a tear. That's
the other thing. So many, he hits a game-tying home run at Dodger Stadium, and nobody even cares. We didn't even mention it until now because of the Pagán meltdown and everything. Seems to happen a lot with that. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't know that it's a concerted effort to run more so than Buxton is more able and willing to run in May than he was in April. And so he's got
maybe.
4 for 4 on steals.
Yeah, maybe.
And Taylor's 6 for 6 on steals. Yep. And Castro is 5 for 8 or something like that.
Castro's trying to figure out some way to be of value to this roster, right?
And gets pinch. Yeah. He comes in as a pinch runner and all that. No one else is stealing bases. So it's really just those 3. So I'm hesitant to be well, now they figured out they got to do some running. It's no, the 3 guys who can run are at least running, which is really all people were kind of asking for coming into the season, which is the guys that can run, have them run. Now, the other guys who can run, theoretically, are Kepler, who's on the IL, and Polanco, who...
Yeah,
I don't think you want him using his legs for anything beyond what he needs to.
He did try and steal some bases recently.
Yeah, he
I'm trying to remember when,
even before this hamstring, he's not been bad defensively, and he's hitting fine, obviously overall. But he looks very almost wobbly defensively to me. Even somewhat normal choppers that he's fielding off to the side, or he's scooping them up on the run. He just doesn't seem like his base. This could be reading into something that isn't there, but it seems like his legs or his base are not. He's not comfortable with it. He's making pretty much all the plays, but now I wonder you toss in a hamstring problem in addition to ankle and knees and everything else. That I don't know. Those legs are there was some quote I saw that back in the day, probably Royce or somebody wrote that. Tony Oliva was a 30-year-old superstar with 90-year-old knees, and that's kind of how I feel watching Polanco.
And we'll also mention Royce Lewis is going to be back here, hopefully at some point. That he could be adding to the stolen base totals as well. I just
Julian too, for that matter. By the way, Julian has stolen 15, 20 bases each of the last couple of years. I think he has 3 or 4 at St. Paul.
I don't need this whole team to be. The piranhas, right? I just want enough. I just want to be able to show that weapon a little bit, especially when the rest of your the weapons you might have in your toolkit are a little bit more limited. I want Taylor to be able to steal bases because Taylor, he can hit some home runs, right? But he's not going to hit for a high average. He's not going to get on base a lot. When he's on base, I want him to do things. I want him to be able to bunt well, which he's had a lot of success with.
Here's how I view stolen bases, which is, if anybody's been listening to the show for the last 10 years or reading my writing for 20 years, I don't really care about stolen bases. And I think baseball has sort of reached that conclusion about 10 years ago also, which is why prior to the rules changes this year, stolen bases went down every year. They plummeted over the course of 10 years because teams realized that the risk of an out is not worth the advantage of moving up from first base to second base in a lot of situations, because the more homers that are being hit, the less valuable moving up one base is. And, to make it work in this environment, you got to be 75-80% successful. Now, that has changed a little bit because they've made it easier slightly to steal bases. And the percentage, I think, is up 4% or something like that, from 74 to 78 roughly. So that should motivate teams to, in more borderline cases, 51% instead of 49% in the coin flip to, okay, let's run here. But the way I view it is, I agree with you. I don't need to see them going nuts on steals. And in fact, with Buxton, he's the most accurate base stealer of all time. He's at 90% for his career, literally the highest ever in baseball history. And yet every time he steals, I just go, was that worth it?
Right.
Was that worth the 5% chance that he's going to ding his hand on the base or, smack his knee into the ground or whatever? But here's how I view steals in general, which is I have no problem with a team, particularly one where they only have like 3 guys who can run, like we just talked about, not running much. I have no problem with a team ranking dead last in stolen base attempts for the year. But you need to have it, like you said, as a weapon in your toolbox.
When you need it, you need it.
Right. And here's how I view it. As a big NBA fan, which is over the last 10 or 20 years, mid-range jumpers, mid-range two-pointers have completely vanished from the NBA for the same reason that stolen bases vanished from Major League Baseball, which is people did the math on it finally strategically and said, why would we shoot an 18-foot shot that we make 40% of the time, and when we make it, it's worth 2 points, when we could step back 3 feet, shoot it 37%, and have it be worth 3 points.
Right.
So if you look at the NBA shot chart as a league, like the heat maps or whatever, which you can get, it's so funny to watch it where it used to be just sort of evenly distributed all around. There were spots.
Now it's all moved towards the basket and over the 3-point line.
Directly in front of the basket in the lane, because those dunks and layups are 70% shots, even at 2 points each, and 3-pointers, obviously. But I think that you saw it with like really extreme teams like the Rockets 5 or 8 years ago with James Harden, where they were only layups and 3-pointers. And then it became playoff time, and a defense just said, well, shit, we only have to guard 35% of this court. All we have to do is guard the 3-point line in the lane. And we let them dribble around the free throw line all they want. And so I think you've seen more and more teams, some teams like the Suns do this, Spurs do this, where it's not that you're going to go with this heavy onslaught of free throw line extended jumpers, because it's still not the most efficient shot to take, but it's that you need to at least attempt enough of them so that the defense has to actually guard that area of the court so that it opens up other areas. And that's exactly how I view.
When it gets to a real clutch time,
you can't always get a layup or a 3.
That's right.
But sometimes you can get a free throw line extended 17-footer or something like that. And that's exactly how I view stolen bases, which is anybody who's got any brain attached to them and can work a calculator can tell you that the math on it is no longer as good and was never really as good as people wanted to believe. It's an exciting play, don't get me wrong. I love to watch stolen bases. But just from a run scoring versus out standpoint. But if you never attempt to steal, it allows the pitcher to stop looking over or throwing over. It allows the catcher to call for different pitches. They can call a breaking ball on certain counts because they're not afraid of having to throw out the runner. And when you get into a spot like the Twins where your offense is stalled for multiple games in a row. And where one run becomes impossible to score, the ability to move up one base and to get a guy in scoring position on a single, it has increased value. The lower the run environment, the more valuable it is to steal bases. So that's kind of how I view it. And so I view, Taylor and Buxton and Willie Castro and whoever else, if Lewis wants to join that mix, as like taking a handful of 2-point 18-footers a game, not because you think it's some brilliant shot, but because there are some possessions in a basketball game where that's going to be your best option.
Baldelli talked in spring training how he wanted to have a team that did more of that than just sort of the 2019 sort of swing and go stuff. And I had not seen it much up until basically this road trip. Versus the Dodgers, I started to see this is the kind of ball that Baldelli would like this team to be capable of playing baseball this way. right? Not necessarily play the. Generally, there's still going to be let's.
But when I want to play that way,
but when we
got to be able to do
way,
it,
right? And that feels like the sort of thing that you want to have when you get to if you're going to be in a postseason.
Well,
match,
that's true too, right? When runs become more scarce than ever.
Yeah.
It is also funny that Baldelli,
when you're facing Kershaw,
right?
Right.
Baldelli as a player, all he did was run.
Right.
He was just pure athleticism and stealing bases, not even at a good clip, and trying to take second on any single and trying to go first to third on any ball in the outfield. Like I remember watching him as a player with the Devil Rays. That's how long ago it was. And he was just contact skills, line drives, and a guy who could just run. Yep. And it is funny now.
He's kind of Dan Gladney.
Yeah, he was better than Dan Gladney. But yes,
right.
Just
but that
pure
kind of
aggression.
Right, yeah.
Just and I've asked him about this because he was essentially, because of health problems, essentially done at like 25 as a player. I've said to him, like, when I used to write about you as a prospect, the big criticism was no plate discipline, swings at everything, kind of the Eddie Rosario approach. And knowing him now, it's interesting to try to think that's the same person with the same brain. But his point was, I didn't know any better. Like, I'm some kid from Rhode Island, didn't play high-level high school baseball. I showed up. I was 21 in the majors. They threw me strikes. I hit them. Like what? But I've said to him before, like, do you think if you would have had a clean bill of health and you would have had a normal dozen-year career, let's say, into your 30s, at 26, 27, 28, kind of like we're seeing Buxton do now, would you have eventually become a guy who tightens up that strikeout to walk ratio? And he told me one time, yeah, maybe, except by that point I wouldn't be fast anymore, and who would need me? That's an interesting thought, because he had a line drive approach.
What you should ask him is, if you had to give yourself a player comp.
Yeah, Eddie Rosario, right-handed Eddie Rosario.
Give me a player comp for Rocco Baldelli if he's stuck around past 25. He loves those questions.
Here's the crazy thing. If you had to comp Rocco Baldelli to like 5 players in baseball history, Byron Buxton would 100% be one of them. In terms of speed and lack of plate discipline and power potential at a young age and injuries.
Yeah, maybe.
And center field, by the way.
Yeah.
You go back and look at some of these articles that were written about like a 21-year-old Rocco Baldelli, and they're talking about like Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio and all that stuff. And so it's funny that he's now the manager of the team that we're sitting here going, well, yeah, maybe they should attempt one stolen base every series. And we're like, yeah, that'd be good if he did it. Okay. Let's part on this. I posted this a few weeks ago, and I'd like to update it, which is the win probability added ranks.
Here we go.
By area of the team.
Okay.
And this is what we'll end it on. Starting pitching, number 1 in baseball. Their rotation has been the best in all of baseball in terms of win probability added. They're also number 1 in innings, number 2 in ERA, all that stuff. It makes number 1 in strikeouts, I think. The bullpen, even after this implosion by Emilio Pagán, 16th out of 30. That seems about right to me.
Huh.
Average-ish
I would
overall.
have thought higher than that.
You mean better than that?
Yeah.
Like 10th?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Might have been before.
It might have been before they lost a full
2 games ago.
60,
or 2 days ago.
62 points or something.
Honestly, it probably was.
Yeah, it might have been.
10th or 12th.
I would have probably put it top 10.
But I do think, in general, those two things match. Starting pitching has been phenomenal. It's number 1 in baseball. Yep. The bullpen seems to me to be average-ish, which it's average, 16th in baseball. The lineup, 28th out of 30. And so,
wow, that's weird.
We spend all this time breaking down individual players and components and decisions and lineup spots and bullpen pecking orders. And at the end, we're 45 games into a 162-game season, and I can tell you by at least one metric, they're the best rotation.
Yeah.
They're a dead average bullpen, and they're one of the worst lineups. And you hear all 3 of those things, to me at least, and you go, that's about right.
Yeah, that's a worse lineup than I would have put them at.
But one thing win probability does is when you score 16 runs against the Dodgers, it stops you at about 6. Because 7 through 16 didn't affect winning, basically.
No, you're right.
And they've had so many games with 0, 1, or 2 that seems right to me. And it is funny that you can just look at one stat and you can go, great rotation, mediocre bullpen, bad lineup.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. Now, where would I expect those to be 3 months from now? Realistically, I mean, I think the rotation has a real chance to remain in the top 5, certainly.
Oh, I think so too.
I think the bullpen can be better, but I don't think it's assured of being
trending
better.
up.
Right.
It's trending down.
And I think, look, if the lineup is still 28th at the end of the season, things have gone very bad for them. I think, an average-ish lineup, that's a big hole to dig out of, so it might end up 20th instead of 16th or whatever. But I think an average-ish lineup should be doable for them. But
yeah, what surprises me about that WPA, and I don't want to dive too deep into it, though, is that what surprised me and doesn't surprise me about it, I guess, is we've talked a little bit about, even in the offseason when they signed Gallo, you were like, Gallo was a real valuable player, and then you took a look at his WPA, and you're like, never particularly good, though, WPA. And we've spent, I think, one of the Patreons a week and a half ago talking a little bit about, does this team underperform in the context of games given how many runs they score, or given sort of their overall OPS and such?
Right.
And is that part of the design of the team? Is that not about luck and not hitting with runners in scoring position, which has absolutely been a problem. Like that,
no, bases loaded.
So the bases loaded.
Runners in scoring position, they've been great, which is doubly weird.
You're right. Yeah, exactly right. Right. Yeah, it's interesting.
Gallo, by the way, has a good WPA.
Yeah, right.
Right now,
absolutely right.
He's
yes, absolutely.
Third on the team, maybe. Solidly
hitting
positive.
The snot out of the ball everywhere. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay. That's it. We will be back Monday morning.
Yep, Patreon.
For the Patreon listeners, commercial free, over an hour. We'll talk about the Angels series.
Trout and Ohtani.
We'll probably have some injury updates, obviously, and we'll set the stage for the homestand. Then after that, that'll be available to Patreon subscribers, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. You should join us.
We'd love to have you join us. We've on Wednesday, we're not sure exactly what we're going to do for that one. It might be another special guest, depending on who's in town.
Might be a guest.
Might be a mailbag, right? Might be a split. Might have some news to talk about.
Yeah. So, join the Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. Thank you to
Sunday, and Harry's, and Game Time, and my bookie.
Yeah, thank you to all of them, too. And we'll talk to you Monday morning for the all Patreon folks.
Gleeman